All right, we got a lot of ground to cover. I'm Fred Kemmerer, AB1OC. I'm your director for New England. And I brought some whole grab bag of different information. I want to sort of go with this where you're interested. So if you don't ask any questions, I'm going to move through certain things pretty quickly. And if you want to stop and drill in on something, that's where we'll spend our time. So we just had a pretty big board meeting and a lot of excitement around it relative to how the ARRL and the board governs itself. I have a little bit there. Some exciting things that the board managed to do relative to new HAMs and young people, clubs and other stuff. We acquired Gordon West's license manuals. I want to talk a little bit about that. And then I want to talk probably about the most important piece of this. And I'm going to warn Mitch and Steve in advance, and I'm probably going to take the full hour here. So, but I'll get out of the way quickly at the end of the hour. But I want to talk a little bit about our future and what we all need to do to secure it, because right now we have some work to do there, I think. So let's get into it. So a couple things that we did differently that the board's never done before, and I'm proud to say I was a pretty big part of making this happen. First of all, you notice headquarters sent an announcement out the day after the board meeting. Anybody remember the last time that happened and let you know what happened? There's a lot of people that are concerned and believe that the ARRL doesn't want to share information, the so-called transparency. And so after that whole fracas that happened in January on a lot of the reflectors and so on, I said, you know what, this is easy to fix. We sat down with the CEO and the marketing people on Sunday after the board meeting ended and said, let's get an announcement out on what we did here. You're going to see that, at least as long as I'm around, you're going to see that after every board meeting going forward. There's no reason we can't do that. It's simple stuff. And quite frankly, having a whole bunch of directors collaborate over changing 3 words in the meeting notes that makes that process take 6 weeks or whatever it takes is ridiculous. We have a lot of competent people at headquarters that know how to write a summary. There's no reason they can't do that. There was a big blow up over ethics and elections and governance. And you know, I've only been a director now for 2 years and a little bit more. So I'm only seeing this movie for the first time. What I see is a board of volunteers, directors, who are good people, but many of them don't have much experience on boards. And when you're on a board, I've been on 3 or 4 pretty major boards, corporate boards, industry boards, and so on. There's a certain set of standards relative to conflicts of interest, how you handle information and so on, that pretty much every board member on the planet knows about and kind of expects. For example, one of the things that I've been involved in every board I've ever been on is once a year, I have to sign a paper that says, I've read all the governance for the organization, I understand it, I'm going to follow it. Why do boards do that? It's pretty much a best practice, by the way, including for nonprofits and for member-based boards. So this whole debate about whether that's appropriate for the ARRL is arcane. It's appropriate for every organization. The reason that you do that is you want to be sure that the people who serve in roles where they govern a lot of finances and a lot of people in some way understand how to conduct themselves and do it the right way. And by having a piece of paper that you have to read and sign every year, it encourages the board members to go back and look at all that stuff and make sure that they know what it says and that they're willing to do it. There's also stuff about disclosing conflicts of interest, which are things like not getting yourself in a situation where you're benefiting financially for something that's going to compete with the organization that you're on the board for. Board members oftentimes find themselves in those situations. And the right way to handle it is to disclose it and do something called recusing yourself, to not involve yourself in any decisions on that board that would conflict with your own personal situation. That's how pretty much every board member is trained to handle that. So the way this has been done to date is that there's a committee that's appointed by the president, as all the board committees are, called the Ethics and Elections Committee, that when somebody potentially does something that might cross a line, they investigate it and they make a recommendation to the board on what to do about it. That can range anything from a written warning to say, hey, you know, you did this, that really wasn't appropriate, please don't do that again, which is what usually happens, to recusals and other things. And this hasn't been used much. It was used recently in a situation with a director. And it always causes a huge blow up because there's a set of people that believe that there's kind of conspiracy to say, well, you know, the board doesn't like so-and-so, so they're going to find something to attack them on and limit their ability to do stuff. And members, for good reason, don't like that. The action that got taken as a result of all this, which I think was very appropriate, is we sent a group of people off to see if we could find a professional company that is used to adjudicating and handling these situations. And there are plenty of them out there because they come up all the time on real boards. Why are we doing that? God, him or herself, could be on the committee to adjudicate these things as a board member, and they would get questions on whether they did it the right way, and they had an agenda. And so by sending this outside the ARRL, when these situations come up to handle the investigation, the interpretation of the law, which is really the governing thing that drives this stuff, pretty much takes that concern out of the equation. And I think in the end result will be a much more effective process so that when these situations do come up, they get handled properly and there aren't questions about how it was done. Now, it's going to take some time to figure that all out. It may come back up for approval by the board in July. It may not, depending on how quickly all of this is going to work. But every board needs a governance structure to handle these situations. And if you all look into this, I suggest that you won't find an organization of any size anywhere that doesn't have something like this. So that's kind of where that came out. Any questions on that piece? Good. All right. Something else relative to transparency. There's a thing called the Director's Workbook, which we're all expected to follow. And there was some concern about the fact that it wasn't publicly available. No good reason, so we made it publicly available. So I don't know if it's on the website yet, but if it isn't, it will be shortly. And what we'll probably do is we find other governance documents that people want to see public. We're going to make them public. There's no reason that the kind of the way the ARRL works shouldn't be visible to everybody. And it's important because if, let's say, Paul's going to run for director, he has a right to know what he's going to be expected to stand up to before he runs. And if those documents aren't public, how can you do that? So that's just a basic fairness. Life memberships. Anybody here a life member? A lot of people. Thank you all very much, by the way. You all noticed that when we made the dues adjustments mid last year, we stopped the life membership program temporarily. Why did we do that? Well, it turns out that at the level that we were charging for life memberships, we were losing money on every single one. And in an environment where we had to raise dues in order to keep the ARRL financially viable, which we did, we were losing close to $2 million a year. And the ARRL does not have pockets deep enough to sustain that for very long. We didn't feel like it was a good idea to keep selling life memberships knowing that we were going to lose money on every single one and then make the term members that aren't life members or maybe can't afford it pay for that by increasing their dues. So we stopped the life membership program and we sent it to what's called an actuarial firm, which are people who figure out what things cost over time and can give us good data on how to price something like a life membership. That work has been done, and the life membership program, the board authorized headquarters to bring it back with new pricing that doesn't lose money, which is, by the way, in the member survey that we did last year around all this due stuff, is what you all mostly told us that we should do. Now, I will tell you that there'll be two things about this, one of which you may like and one of which you might not like. The thing that you're going to like is it's going to be age-based now, probably in blocks of some number of years, maybe 5, 10 years. So if you're in this age range, it's going to cost X. If you're in that age range, it's going to cost Y. So if you're 60, 70, 80 years old and you're just tired of paying ARRL dues, this might not be a bad deal for you. However, the part you may not like is when you see what this really costs, you're probably going to have a lot less life members. Now, there's also discussions going on to have a recognition program for people who have been sort of year by year members forever. To try to do a little bit more for those folks to thank them for being loyal to the ARRL over a long period of time. So over time, you're going to see both things, I think, involved. But that's where life memberships are going. Any questions about any of that? Yeah.
Not out there in cyberland.
Aha.
RNAW2HDI. I've never become a life member. I've been paying my annual dues to support the ARRL. Never understood why we even have life membership, other than for people to save money. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
Has it retained membership that it might not otherwise?
Yeah, you're very right about that. And, you know, basically the life membership program was created, was actually done at the time when the ARRL was cash starved. And it was done as a tool to get a big influx of cash to solve a short-term problem. And unfortunately, you know, like so many things, once the program got set up, it didn't go away. So we ended up continuing to sell life membership. If you were young enough, you might have bought a life membership for $200. I got it. 180. Thank you, Tom. And by the way, hats off to all of you who did that. Wonderful for you. But, you know, in an organization that has to make its finances work to survive, you can't keep doing that kind of stuff. And it's also not fair to the people like you who are paying dues by the year, because at the end of the day, if we lose money, that's where we got to go to get it, right? So it's just not fair. So hopefully this will get fixed. Any other questions about any of that stuff?
How much is life membership now that it's been started again, or is it not quite?
We don't know yet. There's some work that has to be done to figure out how to structure it, and that's what headquarters is working on right now. So I don't know how quickly this will come back. You may see it by mid-year or so. You may take a little bit longer than that, because I think once people look at the actual numbers based on what I've seen, there's going to be some sticker shock and a lot of head scratching to how to make this accessible to as many people as we can. Yeah, Glenn. Like I said, I would hope to see this by the July timeframe come back, but we'll have to see.
Any time frame for recognition for a long time?
There's already some limited stuff going on there, Glenn. What I would like to see is maybe people get their names in QST, have a nice plaque or award or something if you've been a long time, you know, term member like probably you guys have, so that you have something that you can show off a little bit and be proud of. I think that's where we're headed. I don't think that's particularly hard to do, but what I can tell you is there's a long queue of work for people at headquarters to implement stuff. And I don't know quite where that falls in that queue, but as long as I'm around, I'll keep after it because I think it's a good idea. I think it's something we should have done a long time ago.
I got a certificate, I think, at 20 years. The league mailed me a certificate thanking me for 20 years.
Yeah, it'll be something probably a little nicer than that. Yeah. I got a live one here.
Well, no, I was just thinking what I'm paying monthly for HBO Max, for Netflix, whatever, and the amount of time I spend relative to ham radio versus watching TV, and I pay nothing for the ARRL.
I mean, this is a great point. You know, you could, if you have a grandkids, if you take your wife and your grandkids to McDonald's, you could probably spend as much as you spend on a year's ARRL membership, or pretty close to it. But, you know, here's the thing. Did you know the average, anybody have a guess of what the average age of a licensed amateur radio operator is in the United States? Well, not quite that bad, but you're in the right ballpark. It's 75 years old. So let's think about that in terms of somebody's financial situation for a second. 75 years old, you're probably retired. You're probably on a fixed income. You just lived through a period where stocks tanked, that's where you had your savings, and everything cost 25% more than it did 3 years ago. That's what you all are facing, right? Or something along those lines. So when you have to make hard decisions about how to make ends meet and make sure you don't run out of money before you're done with retirement in your life, what do you choose to cut? See, that's where we have to be careful. We did a lot of work in leading up to this dues increase to really understand that picture, including what it meant to the ARRL's long-term financial health. I personally led that effort along with the CEO and the CFO. We have a model that goes out 10 years that takes the fact that people's age into account, inflation into account, and all this other stuff. And one of the things that you probably missed in the dues thing is we passed a rule along with that dues increase that says the ARRL has to reevaluate this stuff every 3 years to make sure that we don't do what we just did, which is lose money for 5 years before we got around to fixing the problem and dug ourselves a $3 or $4 million hole in the process. Okay, so there's a lot of work going on here to try to operate the ARRL in a little bit more sound way fiscally. Some people are criticizing us for doing that. Quite frankly, I think we'd get criticized a lot more if we let the place go bankrupt. And I don't think that would be good for amateur radio. Yeah. We actually do, but indirectly. Most of the way we gain income off of that is when people use their LOTW credits for awards. And if you think about the way LOTW works, that's actually what you want. You want everybody to contribute their contacts in there so that it's a good tool for enabling that part of the business model. We're all probably used to this on the internet, right? Called indirect business model. Google does this all the time. You can search everything you want for free, but you get advertised at, right? So the thing that you use isn't necessarily the thing that generates the income. It's just kind of how people do business these days, I guess. All right, let me move on here. I'm actually only on my first chart, and I have 12 more. All right, a couple other things I just want to mention. We did some great stuff for newer hams and younger people. And by the way, if you think about that 75-year-old thing that I just told you about a minute ago, focusing on newer hams is pretty dang important for the ARRL. Now, one of the other things that I've been looking at was part of this study is the proportion of license classes that the ARRL has versus the proportion of licensed classes in the United States. Okay, in an ideal world, they would be similar. So if there are, 30% techs in the United States, you'd have 30% techs roughly in the ARRL membership. What do you think that looks like? Anybody have a guess? Yeah. It's not quite that bad, but it's heavily biased to extras and generals if you look at ARRL membership. What does that tell me? We're not doing nearly enough of a good job on outreach to newer people. And if you think about that 75-year-old thing, and we don't fix that, it's going to kill the organization. That's our future. So you'll notice, if you look at what we've been doing over the last 3 or 4 board meetings, you see all kinds of motions, many of them I've authored, to focus the ARRL more on the newer side of the amateur radio spectrum and try to get that back in balance. And it's super, super important. If we license 10 techs today, how many of them are likely to be active in a year? Anybody have a guess on that one? You're close, it's 2, 20%. So we do all that work to get 10 new people involved, and we end up with 2 active operators. If you do that, and by the way, the average age of those licensees is about 50 years old, 50. That's considered, anything under 50 we consider to be a win for younger hams at this point. So imagine if we let that go on, what's going to happen, forget about the ARRL, what's going to happen to amateur radio in 10 years? 75, median age becomes 85. Most of us aren't going to be around, folks. I'm sorry, but it's true. And so we have a pretty urgent problem in focusing on newer people. And the ARRL needs to lead there, not follow. So 2 more initiatives got piled to the plate, one that I brought and one that Kristen McIntyre brought. Free membership for students that are under the age of 21. You don't get to vote, you don't get print QST, but you get access to all the training and all the programs. Why are we doing that? When we do get young people in schools interested, we do that indirectly through support of the ARRS program, where we help schools make space station contacts. We have something called Teachers Institute, where we bring teachers in every week and show them how to integrate amateur radio into what they're teaching in schools. We usually end up getting a pile of kids that are interested, and we don't have a good next step for them. This is the beginnings of the creation of that next step. And the idea is to get them into the ARRL without tying up their funds. You'll see when I talk about club grants, we're trying to make money available for shared stations in places like schools and other things, so that we can create a pathway for younger people to get involved in amateur radio. And it's really, really important. It's hard, and I hear people say, we can't do it. We're either going to do this now, or we're not going to have anything like the amateur radio we have now in 15 years. It's a decision point, folks, and we need to get at it. We need to learn how to do this, and it's not that hard. The other thing that got done, which I think is very creative, is we authorized $25,000 for a coding competition. Anybody know what a hackathon is? Anybody ever heard of that? This is probably going to be an ARRL hackathon. More than likely, I don't know for sure what it's going to be, but it might be something like software tools that you can use on the web to do practice exams or learn or something like that. It'll be open to all comers, whether they have college degrees or not. There may be one winner, there may be multiple winners. If it's somebody who's in an education situation, it might be a scholarship. If it's somebody who's not going to college, it may be in a different form. But the idea, and this is really important to what we were talking about a minute ago, the idea is to do some creative things to try to engage young people in amateur radio and the ARRL on their terms, not on our terms. Now, we may try 10 of these things, and we're going to find 2 that work. But I can tell you from my own experience in rebuilding a club in New Hampshire to what has become one of the largest clubs in the United States, this is how you do this. If any of us in the room knew the magic formula that would fix this in one stroke, we wouldn't be talking about this, it'd already be fixed. And so what we're going to need to do is try a lot of things, and we're going to have to get comfortable with learning to fail fast. If we try 10 things and we find 2 that work, and maybe those 2 only half work the first time, that's a touchdown. We focus our energy on the 2 that work and we keep learning. That's how we're going to figure this out. I don't think there's any other way to do it. So 2 initiatives in that direction. Some great support for the ARRI service. You'll start to see pretty active marketing coming out of the league to try to get new people to sign up for ARRIs, which is emergency services work. Huge problem with needing new people. I'm going to sound like a broken record on this. People that are not physically able to deploy in emergencies is also a huge problem for ARRIs. Paul could probably give you a whole talk on this problem, I bet. And so the league is going to try to do a better job to enable all the ARRIs teams, not which of all are ARRL members, by the way, to try to do a better job of recruiting new people and keep our emergency services work healthy. That's what that is. Government relations. How many of you are in HOA or covenant restricted situation? I know you are, Tom. Anybody else? You are? You are? All right. At this stage, we've had an antenna bill resubmitted in Congress. I think we have about 15 representatives sign up to support it. And that's the good news. The bad news is we need 215 to pass the bill through the House. So at the rate we're going, this is going to take a while. Okay, now, it's important work because having a presence in Washington, D.C. means that people take us seriously at the FCC, they take us seriously in Congress, and when something really bad that affects amateur radio comes across the transom, we have a much better ability to deal with it. So this is not at all about backing off or taking our foot off the gas on this. But I will also tell you, at the rate we're going, probably 3 other people, generations of people will be directed before we see a bill passed. Now, I believe that support that work, but I also believe there's a lot more the ARRL needs to be doing to help you all in the interim. So one of the things I did is I created a motion and got it passed, and I'm going to be chairing a committee to look at what the ARRL can do to provide better support. So what's this going to look like? Well, there are people all over the country who have negotiated with their HOAs and gotten antennas up. We need to provide a resource so those of you that are in that situation have some tools you can use. We need to have people who can provide guidance that if you're buying an HOA restricted property, you can negotiate before you sign a contract to buy that property to protect your rights. There's a lot of people having success with that, okay? Now, that doesn't help all of you that are stuck already, but more and more newer homes and actually retirement communities and other things are all being built with HOA restrictions. So there's a lot of people that, if they're not in this space now, are going to enter it. And then lastly, there's going to be a look at whether we can do a better job of providing legal help for the people that get in a battle. And I think there's going to be a lot of other things that we come up with as well. Probably going to be an ongoing effort over the course of the year to figure this out. And I'm expecting that we're going to create some new ARRL programs to try to help the people like you all that are in this situation. It's the right thing to do. And at the level of money we're spending, which is significant on this issue, we need to divert some of those funds to something that's going to take some of the pain away in the short term. Any questions about any of that? Anybody? Yeah, Glenn.
This does go back to the league trying to encourage more participation in ARRL. I recall a few decades ago when FEMA was getting formed or whatnot, that that they would come in and just sort of take charge and basically nullify the efforts of ARRL. Was that correct at the time? Is it any better now as far as?
You know, the environment, first and foremost, the thing that makes ARRL valuable or not are what the agencies that deal with emergency responses, Red Cross, FEMA, state CERT groups, stuff like that, are the people that really determine whether ARRL provides a useful service or not. Their focus on amateur radio has declined significantly. And there's some good reasons for that, and quite frankly, there's some really dumb reasons for that. Some of the good reasons are that there's a notion that the internet will be there in disasters, that satellite services will be there in disasters, and so on. Here's the dumb part. Russians are thinking about putting nukes in space. What do you think is going to happen to that communications infrastructure if that happens and is ever used? It ain't going to be there, folks. None of it. And so what we're starting to see is that the government agencies are beginning to rethink their strategies. And you know, you've got people like FirstNet, the AT&T's another cellular thing that's a government emergency service where if there's a disaster, the government folks can take priority on the cellular system. Problem is, they're just as vulnerable to those attacks as the rest of the internet, because most of that stuff, and I can tell you this because I built half of it when I was at Bell Labs, is critically dependent on the internet. It won't work without it. And so there's an opportunity for us here to bring amateur radio back and make it a more integral part of what government agencies feel is important to have as a backup. And by the way, we're seeing more and more folks in places like FEMA particularly are becoming increasingly worried about this. Here's the other problem. When there's a local on-the-ground emergency, you know, if we wait to use ARRL till the Russians nuke the satellites, we're probably not going to be ready. We have to have a scenario where people in ARRL can deploy on a regular basis and practice what they do and be prepared, have the equipment, have the techniques, know how to organize themselves, know how to set these networks up quickly. And the problem with doing that is if we can barely make it to the Hamfest to walk around, we're probably not real well equipped to deploy ourselves in a major weather event in New England. So back to the question of, can we get younger people involved? And back to the question of why we need to market ARRL to those people. So that's a long-winded answer to your question, Glenn, but hopefully it gives you some context for where we are. Yeah. Anybody else? All right, let me keep moving here. I'm on slide 4. We're doing all right. I'm going to cover the ARRL Foundation. I'll just make a note that ARDC gave us $2.1 million additional to use for scholarships and another round of club grants. And I'll come back if there's time and talk a little bit more about the club grant thing and hopefully encourage some of you all to work with your clubs and take advantage of that. And we elected a whole bunch of people, which you probably don't care about. All right, so what's going to come next? The board made a commitment back to transparency to use roll call votes going forward for anything that's not trivial. So if we're going to pass a motion to take a break for lunch, we're probably not going to do a roll call vote for that. That's kind of a waste of time. But if we're going to do anything significant that the members would care about, you should expect, hope by the July board meeting, that electronic tools will be put in place and how everybody votes will be recorded. Now, I have had a policy since I've been director that if you want to know how I voted on any issue, I will absolutely tell you, but I'll also tell you why. And one of the things that you all need to be careful of is you'll see a lot of stuff online. Anybody know about My ARRL Voice or some of the groups in QRZ that love to kind of maybe not put the ARRL in such a favorable light? I'll be nice about it. What you tend to see in those is you tend to see a fact. The board voted for X, and then a whole bunch of made up stuff on what really happened, most of which is usually not accurate, or if there's any truth in it at all, it's half-truths. Be very careful what you all read there. If you have a question about what's going on,
please reach out to me. I pride myself in responding to everybody who does that. Maybe an email, maybe a phone call, whatever, but you will get a response from me, and I'll let you know what happened, and I'll also tell you the truth about why it happened and what's really going on. Don't get your information from those places. There are many people in those forums who've had run-ins with the ARRL, and there's quite a few grudges being prosecuted. And I don't want to say any more about it. All right? But you can expect to see a pretty strong commitment to putting the transparency question behind us. Roll call voting, disclosing the documents, having independent people deal with governance issues. All of those things are aimed at doing this the right way, finally. And I think you're going to see all that happen. We talked about the work on the HOA stuff. And one thing I'm going to do a little differently. Some of you, have any of you been to my town halls? Anybody been to one of those? A few people have. All right. I do at least 3 sessions a year, and these go out to the ARRL mailing list. So if you haven't signed up for that yet, you might want to go on the ARRL site and put yourself in for that list. It's something that you'll only get emails from me on, where I get everybody to get on a Zoom meeting for an hour. We talk about what's going on, like I'm doing here, and then I take questions. In the spirit of transparency, we record everyone and we publish them. If you go on anydiv.arrl.org, you can find the videos of every town hall I've ever done. And so if you have concerns, or you just want to know what the hell is going on with the ARRL, please start attending those sessions. I've been tending to do them after the board meetings to explain what happens. I'm going to probably shift to doing them for a while before the board meetings. So I give you a preview of what I think is coming and get some input. So that's something we're going to do a little bit better. Any questions about any of this board stuff before I move on? Yeah.
Can you say that website slower?
Yeah, it's anydiv, November Echo Delta India Victor. That stands for New England Division, anydiv.arrl.org. Okay, so check it out. All right, what else do we have here? I've got some stuff on legislation. I think I've talked probably enough about this. This is the antenna bill. I'm probably gonna leave this for right now. If you want to hear more about what's going on with the Shortwave Modernization Coalition or any of this other stuff, check out our last town hall video. There's some other things here I want to be sure I get to. All right, club grants. Any of you involved in or familiar with the last club grant program that we did? All right, the ARRL got a grant from ARDC that was right around $500,000. And we set up a system. I put a lot of personal work in this because I'm kind of a clubs guy. Those of you who know me, that's kind of my background in amateur radio. And we tried to set up a system to encourage people who wanted this money to do projects that would not only help their club, but would help the amateur radio community and to some degree the public around them. So we tried to set this up so the people that got the money would focus on some of the problems we're talking about and be a magnifier for what the ARRL could do. We ran this in 2 rounds. We had 213 grant total applications totaling $2.8 million contend for the $500,000 we had to hand out. And to give you a sense of where that money went, I have a couple of charts. I know this is probably a little bit of an eye test, but let's look at this by category. Half the grants were aimed at clubs who wanted to focus on new hams and younger people. And I think maybe based on what we talked about here, maybe you now see why we did that, right? Next up was membership and recruiting in general, things to get clubs membership back up. A lot of clubs are struggling with keeping enough members to keep clubs going. Right? Get on the air and ham development. So you can see some 3/4 of the money basically went at trying to bring new people of all ages into amateur radio. Okay. We also did some projects where we funded club stations. For those of you in HOAs, wouldn't it be wonderful if you had a club with a really nice station around you that you could remote into and do amateur radio on a top-notch station as part of being a member of the club? That's the kind of stuff that I want to try to create through this other committee, more focus on. That way you all have a way to participate, even though you may not be able to do it directly at home. I think it's really important. At any rate, long story short, we got enough money as part of that 2+ billion we got from ARDC to fund another round of grants. So there'll be another shot coming up probably later this year, similar to how this one worked with similar criteria, I hope, for those of you in clubs to get grants up to $25,000, and we handed out several at that size to do projects like this. And I'd very much encourage you, if your club is struggling a little bit, step up and take the lead and create a project like this. It's a great way to revitalize what your club is doing and generate a lot of new membership in the process. And that's probably what we're trying to do. Yeah, Tom? I'm sorry, what do we find out about what?
How do we find out what the others did, what their projects were?
There are some, I believe, presentations that are out there. I don't know if any of them have been public. Why don't I take that one back to Mike Walters and see if I could get him to do a session similar to what we did for ARDC to sell them on the initial money and highlight some of the projects. Let me tell you what a few of them are. Some are pretty creative. One school had that I know of, had a shared station that was in disrepair. They took the money to rebuild it. Another group in Connecticut said, you know, we figured out this club growth thing. We're going to build a program to train other clubs how to do that. We funded that. There were one group, this is a very creative one, in the spirit of failing fast. Young person said, you know what? I want to make an amateur radio variation of Minecraft, which is the most popular online game, and make it available to the amateur radio community. So young people have a way to get involved in amateur radio on their terms. Funded that. So the intent here is to do some creative things that are designed, and every one of those that I laid out was designed to influence more than the specific people in the club that got the money. It was designed to be a program that scaled out well beyond their boundaries. Those are the kinds of things we're looking for these grants, to try to magnify the impact of the money. Any other questions on this one? All right, I want to get to what probably is the most important point here. But one more thing. Anybody know who Gordon West is? Yeah, everybody knows Gordon West. Gordon has published and been a real advocate for amateur radio license training for a long time. So now think about what we're trying to get the ARRL involved in. You can sort of see that strategically, working with someone like Gordon is really important, right? He's an icon on new ham development in the community. So what did we do? Well, first thing we did is we acquired the rights to his books. That was a deal that I worked on directly, actually negotiated part of it. And the deal closed early in the year. So the ARRL is now the provider of Gordon West's licensing manual, but that's not where it ends. In the process, we also convinced Gordon to work with the ARRL to help us build some of these programs that I'm talking about. And Gordon has been named the ARRL National Instructor and will have a great deal of input into how we train people to do license training. So again, another thing that we're trying to get the league to move on to aim at the problem of getting newer people involved. Okay? All right. This is the part I really want to talk about. How many of you are concerned? How many are in a club? Let me start out there. Well, half the room. How many people are having problems keeping the membership from declining in your club? How many people are having trouble finding a full slate of officers to run when there's an election? Okay. How many people are feeling like that other than having a breakfast and maybe doing field day, our club isn't doing much? Well, that's a good sign. Okay. We need to be about focusing on the age problem and new hams. Now, here's a deal for you. About 700,000 hams in the United States. How many of those hams do you think are active more than once a month? Yeah. It's about half. So there are some 350,000 people, or half the population, that are not active. Now there's a million reasons for those, but let's go a little deeper. Let's take that group of 10 techs that we talked about licensing, and only 2 of them stay active. What about the other 8? That group is probably well over 100 to 150,000 people. Those other 8, maybe more. Okay. What happens if we license or get active just 10% of 150,000 people? 50,000 people, right? that would be about a 15% increase or so in ARRL's membership. A lot of people, right? What do you think happens when a club focuses on that problem? Let me tell you a story about a club that I was involved with. It's called the National Area Radio Society. By the way, Skip just walked in the room. He was involved in this journey with me as well. About 12 years ago, that club almost went out of existence. And if we got maybe, I think we had about 30 people left on the roster. My predecessor as president had to cancel field day. By the way, Nashville Club has one of the best field day kits in the world for clubs. They did 22, 23 alphas and have equipment towers, beams, everything you could ever want. Couldn't get enough people to do field day. Isn't this starting to sound familiar? Maybe going on in your club, right? What did we do? We did two things really well. We started out by focusing on licensing, and in the first 6 months, we probably licensed 20 new people through classes, invested in the effort to do that. When the election came up and nobody wanted to run, we elected half the board for hams that were licensed less than 6 months. Best thing we ever did. You know why? Those people wanted to focus on what they were about, the new people. Now, not all of them were young. Probably most of them were under 50, but not all of them. And they built and put the energy into the club to do tech nights, license training, ham boot camps. Our first field day was a little rough. You know, there's nothing like trying to put a 40-foot tower up with a ham who's licensed 3 months and maybe he's been on a repeater. So it had its challenges. That club today has 380 members and is nationwide. We did that in less than 10 years. So I'll give you one formula that you can try. Focus on new people. Doesn't have to be young people. There's lots of challenges with getting into school or in those situations. Just focus on new people. And how can you do that? Well, I have a few ideas here for you. First and foremost, it's about what that person is interested in doing first and what you're interested in doing second. Okay? Imagine this, imagine when you all were getting involved in amateur radio. How many of you had a ham that mentored you, by the way, somewhere in your amateur radio career? Quite a few people, right? That used to be pretty common, used to be easy to find. I remember my first mentor. If your first mentor, when you were looking at amateur radio, which might have involved sideband or directional antenna, said, you know what? If you don't do amateur radio and you don't do Spark, you're not a real ham. How long would have you been an amateur radio operator? Not very long, right? Look in the mirror. Not everybody does this, but enough of us do that it's a problem. I probably mentored 1,000 people in the last 10 years in some form. 500 of them were through license classes that we taught. The thing that works best is to spend a little time, and as half-cocked as it might seem to you, to understand what that person thinks they want to do with amateur radio and focus on that. This has to be about what the new person wants to do, not what you necessarily have enjoyed. Now, by the way, I've never seen a new ham that's been in a mentoring relationship that hasn't eventually taken an interest in what their mentor does. But the hard part is to open that initial door that gets that person excited about doing something with their license. And that's a very personal thing. It's different for every single ham. Invite somebody into your shack. I do this all the time. We just minted, and I taught a tech class this weekend, 13 members, 13 new techs. What do we do? Maybe half of them are in New England. We're gonna have an open house in our shack. We're gonna bring them all in for a day. We're gonna look at all kinds of stuff. We're gonna let them play with the radios and ask questions. And that's gonna be all about them. Think about mentoring in terms of, hey, I'm at a club meeting. Raise your hand. Hey, anybody want to come to my shack this weekend and see how amateur radio works and play on the air with me? I guarantee you, if there's anybody in that room that's been licensed less than 5 years, they're going to talk to you after the meeting. They can possibly make it. Open some doors. And by the way, one of the things I've found about doing this, when I see that new tech, use my call sign and talk to Europe on sideband for the first time, and have that experience, it's like when I did it the first time. There's nothing like it in amateur radio. Try it, you'll see. Try it, you'll see. Skip's invested a lot of effort in mentoring too. He knows this as well. He's another excellent person to talk with about this. One of the best programs that Nashville Club had, we actually stole from Skip's Club, called it Tech Night. It's a once a month technical training session that we do. Tremendous success. Help a newer ham put up a simple antenna. I put up more vertical dipoles. I think I probably should buy stock in whoever makes radio waves antennas and RG8X coax, because I probably move more of it through the channels than any ham alive. You know, it's not too hard to put up a vertical dipole in somebody's tree limb. You can do that about 2 hours. Make it a learning experience. It's a wonderful project to do with a new ham. Get them on the air. Hands-on learning. Sponsor building a kit. You know, I looked over in the swap meet. There's a whole table through of tin can tuna kits and Altoids 10 tuna kits. Have your club raise a little money and buy a bunch of those and have a club meeting where you all bring your soldering irons out and build something. That is a great opportunity for all of you to get excited, including the new people. You get some hands-on experience with electronics. You know, one of the things a lot of hams tell me is, oh, you know, kids, they don't want to learn and they don't want to build anything and they're all spec operators. Pardon my French, that's bullshit. That's not true. I have never seen a young person. I've built Pixie transmitter kits. Skip, you may have actually helped me with some of these. $10 CW transmitters in schools. We must have built 100 of those. Put them in Altoid cans. We got a decent receiver. Let the kids do a Morse code competition and see who was the best. We give them another kid a little oscilloscope kit based on a Raspberry Pi or something. Wonderful project your club can do. Tremendous fun. Not hard to do that at all. Maybe you have a young person who's athletic or wants to do outdoor stuff. Help them sponsor a soda or a POTA activation for your club. Don't you do it. Let them do it. Just focus on making them successful. See, part of what this is about is we need to develop some new leaders that have all that energy that comes with being a new ham to want to try everything and do everything. Remember those days when you started out, when you wanted, there was almost nothing in amateur radio that you weren't at least enough interested in that you'd have tried it if you had the chance? See, that's what the newer hams, and it doesn't matter how old they are, they all have that energy. They just don't know what to do with it. And quite frankly, from surveys that the league and others have done, I see this. One of the number one reasons they say they're not doing anything is nobody's helping them. There's no mentoring that they can find. Okay. If you're into this, simple satellite contacts with a couple HTs, by the way, something you can easily do with a tech license. Wonderful project. Here's a good one. How many of you do field day? How many of you put the new hams on your best 20-meter sideband station? Good. What happens when you do that? What about those hams that you're doing that with? Are they getting active? Yeah. Why are they getting active? You just told them you're the most important thing to them. See, when we take the attitude at a field day that says, oh, until you've been in this club for 10 years, you're going to be on the GOTA station, or we're going to put you on 10-meter CW or sideband at night, places where you're going to have a pretty poor experience. Only one time you will see those people at field day when you do that, and you'll never see them again. So part of making this successful is you got to really walk the talk. You can't just give it lip service. You got to make the new people your top priority. Now, I know of 3 or 4 clubs that have done this. They've all grown to well over 100 members. There's one I know out in Utah, the Nashville Club, the club that's mentoring other clubs down in Connecticut is a third example. And I'm sure if I worked it, I could find 20 more. So if you're looking for a formula to rebuild your club, and everybody's different, I would strongly recommend you start here. And if you want to spend more time talking about this, I'm always available for a Zoom to share the things that I've seen work with many of you who want to do that. It's really important. All right, that's all I brought. And again, what's in it for you to mentor? You had that same experience the first time you did it. And believe me, there's nothing like that in the world. And the more people you do it with, I think you'll find that the more enthusiastic you're going to get about amateur radio. All that stuff that made it so exciting when you first started out is all going to come right back to you. So I encourage you to try.
Any questions, any success stories? on doing this that anybody has that they'd like to share? Any of this making any sense? If you think I'm full of it, just tell me I won't do this again. I'm pretty open to feedback. Mitch, I know this was important to you. Hopefully you got something close to what you wanted. Yes.
Couple questions for you, Fred. Just looking at YouTube, and I'm sure a lot of younger people go to YouTube now to learn things.
Yep.
I go to podcasts.
Yep.
Used to regularly listen to the wonderful podcast that ARRL did. Now, unfortunately, guys passed away and you didn't adequately replace it.
I'm sorry.
But I learned something every week.
Yep.
I listen to Ham Radio Workbench rigorously. I've learned more from those guys than I have in my 60 years as a ham. I don't see the ARRL doing enough in terms of podcast and YouTube.
Stay tuned. Go back to January of last year and look at the motion I passed on new ham development. It has 3 elements to it. Professional instructor training for licensing. Gordon West, all that stuff, part of that. Monthly, live, with an instructor and interaction, technical training. 3, the ham boot camp program that we've been so successful in NARS, I want to give that to the league and make it a national effort. Get on the air program, live, interactive. Why not YouTube? Just say it's already there. What value can we add? 2 reasons. How many YouTube videos do you have to watch to learn something complicated? Can you ever really do that usually with just one? You usually invest in 2 or 3 till you figure it out, right? Okay. How about if somebody sits down with you and shows you how to do it? What happens then? Now, maybe it's hard to find that experience, but it's much quicker and much deeper because the questions that I have or you have that video don't ask, I can ask somebody who knows what they're doing and already done it. Here's the second reason it's even more important. When somebody joins, we hear a lot that people don't want to join clubs. Young people are not joiners, right? Anybody hear that? Ever hear that from your breakfast or your club meeting? You know what the real deal is? Young people want a social interaction, just like we do. They have their own communities. Some of them are online, but they want a social interaction. What happens at your club when the new ham in the back of the room that nobody knows shows up? Does everybody rush over to talk to them? Do you try to make friends? Or do you stay with your comfort clutch and spend all your time talking to each other? And think about, walk a mile in that person's shoes for a second. What message does that send that new ham about the amateur radio community? Is that something you're going to want to be part of? Probably not. And so the reason that the live mentoring is so important is it's an opportunity to provide one of the number one things that those people that actually show up at a club meeting that are new want, which is a social relationship with a human being. And if you don't do that, you miss the biggest opportunity. Another thing, how many times have you gone, how many of you do VE tests? Anybody do those? How many times have you gone to a VE session where everybody sits around, eats coffee, drinks coffee, eats donuts, processes the paperwork, congratulates the new hams, and does nothing more? We have that experience at a VE session. You know what we do at our VE sessions? I personally sit down at the end of them when we do a live one, and I talk to every ham and say, what are you trying to do in amateur radio? And I spend 10 minutes and try to connect them with somebody or something that's going to get them started. You know what percentage of those people we convert to club members? About 90%. This is all about social interaction. It's not just a technical problem. And if we're going to fix it as a community, we have to get about providing everything that the new person is looking for. It's got to be about what they want to do. It's got to be personal, and you got to make some friends. That's really, really important. Skip knows this from stuff he's done with the Scouts and other things. By the way, in case you can't tell, Skip is kind of my inspiration for a lot of what's worked here. Any other questions? I know I'm getting a little preachy. I'm sorry. This is something that really means a lot to me. Yeah.
Yeah, a year or two ago, I asked you about the ARRL's marketing strategy, specific with regards to GMRS and the untapped potential for new hams and new members.
Yep.
And I say this because in the Central Maine area, it's really exploded in popularity, and it seems like we could do more to market to that. You said there was something in the works. Has there been any form?
We looked at this. There's a strategic planning exercise going on, which, by the way, I'm leading. And we looked at a whole bunch of scenarios, one of which was, could we
kind of do what we a little bit missed with the CB craze around GPRS, where we get all these people that are kind of involved in GMRS, involved in this. Here's what we found. I think, I don't remember the numbers, so don't misquote me, but a very high percentage of the GRMS licenses already have an amateur radio license. And the effect that we saw was not people starting in GRMS. What the effect we saw was people who were hams for looking for something new to do and moving into GMRS. So in terms of, does that mean we shouldn't bother? No, there's some low-hanging fruit there. But it's not a fundamental strategic way to fix this problem. It's the community, the demographics are not well suited to what we need to accomplish. Doesn't mean it's wrong, but an organization that has a queue that's this long of things that you do, you have to be a little careful about how much you put in that queue, otherwise we might go about it. Other questions? Yeah. Yep, last one.
Piece of the presentation.
Yes.
Over the last 20 or 30 years, there's been a lot of attempts at this. What do you think our chances are to get something through Congress?
Honestly, I don't know. All I can tell you is that we've been at it. We probably spent all in with this year's budget close to $500,000 trying. Some of that was our own fault for starting and stopping, which I think we're all pretty smart that we don't want to start and stop again. It's going to be very difficult to get something through Congress. What we do gain, though, by being there is important. We gain much more influence on the FCC. If somebody does something to try to overtake our bans and so on, we have a much better chance of pushing back on that. So there are reasons for us to be in Washington that are important, whether we get a bill passed or not. I hope we do. I don't know if we ever will. The committee that I mentioned that I passed a motion on in January to form is designed to try to provide some relief for people, that have the ARRL do a better job of helping people who are in these situations through shared stations, things that they can negotiate with their HOAs on and other things, so they can have a ham radio experience. It's not an either or, it's a both. Both need to be done. And the good news with the new committee is if we follow through well on it, it's something that can help you all in the short term, no matter what happens in Congress. Folks, I about worn out my welcome here. I hope this was helpful for you. Please consider joining our town halls. Please support Paul in what he's trying to do here in Vermont. And if you have any question, anything I can do for you, ab10c@arrl.org or call me in my number at QST. Thank you for coming out.